So when you look through history, don't you love some of the stories where the people just like come alive and you could start thinking back then what it felt like during that time? How their hearts were longing, how their hearts were loving, how their feelings were hurt, all these things that happened. As for the times of sorrowing, what their sorrowing was like, and what those times when it just felt like God just really showed up in the midst. All that's in history. Sometimes we have to read between the lines, huh? Don't you love a love story? I love this story here. This movie actually is Captain Blood, and it's Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland. A love story. I'm sure it's based in history, but I'm sure it's not true. But there is a love story that is true. But you have to read between the lines of history and the history novels, and not just novels, but you have to read in the history books of what this story was about. There was a man, stories about love and legend. There was a man, a poet named Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, and he wrote this long, epic, romantic poem about a love triangle. Well, it was two guys that really loved this beautiful young girl. But one was a swashbuckling type of captain, and the other was a young man that was a cooper or carpenter on the Mayflower. It was between Captain Miles Standish, John Alden, and a young maid, a young girl, 16 years old, that came on the Mayflower with her parents, Priscilla Mullins. True story. Though it's a long poem, and he does romanticize it, it shows the deep hearts of those three people and the signs of the time. Miles Standish, yes, he was the captain. Well, not so much as the captain, but the protector, I should say, and he was a captain on the Mayflower. And he was there to protect, for the protection when they got there, to protect. He was an Indian fighter, and he was a soldier. And his wife was with him, but his wife was very sick. And then John Alden, a handsome young man, basically torn between devotion to his captain and the love for this pilgrim maiden that he meets on the Mayflower. Priscilla says, despite her domestic virtues, as we know that she was a very much of a comforter and a helper wherever she went, speaks her mind right away in a fashion that is not common for most young women at the time. This poem makes these characters almost a household word across America, as it was written in 1814. Everyone knew about these three on the Mayflower. We know the Mayflower, and you know what the Mayflower was. It was the first colonies to come to America, and the first colony to be established in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. You know, I don't have to go back and tell you that history, as you've probably gone through every year hearing it on Thanksgiving of the Indians and the Pilgrims. So the first 6 months that the Mayflower landed, there were so many hardships. And sometimes they think possibly that the whole crew had a touch of scurvy, which was very, very disease, very common on long voyages on ships, because it was actually a deficiency of vitamin C. Excuse me. Looks like I need some vitamin C. But anyway, so when they got there after 6 months, about half of the people on the Mayflower end up dying, including Mrs. Rose Standish, who departed on January of 1621. And then we know the Mullins, William Mullins departed on February of that same year, and possibly Mrs. Mullins too. So we have these young teenagers coming over on the Mayflower. We know John Alden was most probably an orphan, and he was sent to travel to America, maybe not even of his will, but that he needed the work, and that he wanted to maybe to go to America, but America was a place a lot of people died. But John took the work because he admired the Captain Miles Standish. And so he became a captain's, almost was like a father figure to him. And he became his errand man. And he loved the captain, as you would love a father. Well, we have right after their landing, with the right away of Mrs. Standish dying, we see that Miles looks on this beautiful young lady and thinks, oh, my bereavement, I wouldn't be bereaving if I had her as a wife. And so he goes to William Mullins, and he petitions for the courtship, which was in that time. And he basically said, it says here, Mullins, the daughter of Priscilla Mullins, the daughter of William Mullins, the breach in both families would be repaired, he thought, and possibly even her father thought, that giving her to Miles Standish might soften his heart in bereaving his wife. So Captain Miles Standish sends for John. And John, he knew that John was friends with Priscilla. He knew that on the ship that they met each other, both being teenagers, and that they both were very helpful and very considerate people. He has no idea of John's affection towards Priscilla. So he sends John as his messenger, and he went faithfully to communicate the wishes of the great captain. John at first thought, well, that's life. This is what I must do. So he went first to Mr. Mullins, and the old gentleman did not object at all about giving his daughter in marriage, but he was concerned about her and thought, would she object? Surely, Miles Standish, this famous Indian fighter, a brave, courageous man, any woman would want to marry him. Well, we know Priscilla, she wasn't too wild about him, especially he was quite a few years older than her, and her eyes actually were on John, and John doesn't even know it. So as John goes to tell this message and to convince this young lady of marrying the great captain, Priscilla, she's like, oh, why doesn't he come and ask me himself? Oh, John, and she argues a bit, but admits before he is very convincing to her, but she is not convinced. John here is, fair and ready, very courageous in himself, but a little shy, but really his job must be to deliver this errand. Miss Mullins, after listening again to the request with open and pleasant countenance, says the most famous line of that time in prose and poetry with Longfellow. She says, "Prithee, John, why do you not speak for yourself?" John is taken back. He blushes and bows and takes leave. But with a look, he is totally thinking, what should I do? I need to deliver her. I cannot even express what I think right now. So he leaves. However, he does soon return to visit her with a proposal in marriage. And of course, Priscilla, she is excited as he comes and bows on one knee and proposes to marry her. But now what? What with Captain Miles Standish? Do we not know? Will Captain Miles Standish ever forgive John as he sends a proposal to marriage instead? He proposes himself to marry her? So what a dilemma that they caught him. One of the first love problems in America, at least with the colonists coming. We have this beautiful story. We know that William Mullins died in 1621, right after they landed in February. So not long after this, her father died, and that her mother had already died. And we know that Priscilla married John. Possibly it's not recorded, but we know in 1622, by 1625, they had children. We know that Miles Standish married Barbara Standish in 1623, another lady. We also know that John Alden and Miles Standish were the founders of Duxbury, which was a Plymouth settlement right across from Plymouth, where the Plymouth Rock was. So, and we know another tidbit that's kind of important, that Alexander Standish was Miles Standish's second child, and Sarah Alden was Priscilla and John's fourth child. They got married. So possibly this whole love deal worked out in the end, as we know. In the poem, Miles Standish does come to the wedding, and it is worked out. In the poetry, it's very, very sweet language. It's one of my favorite poems of all time. And it's really not a poem. It's written in a prose-like manner, but such beautiful language. Longfellow puts this whole courtship, the courtship of Miles Standish, and how John and Priscilla love each other. You see, I believe they were teenagers. They were probably one of the few teenagers on the Mayflower. Of course, they knew each other, and they confided in each other. Although he did not come back from, John was not from the Puritan background. He had come from the background as an orphan sailor. And we know that Priscilla, that her parents were Puritans, that she was raised in the faith in the Bible. She knew. They both weren't really, all hepped up on coming on the Mayflower, I'm sure. But as they did, they saw a lot of hardship together. Maybe not, being in a courtship relationship, but they were in a friendship relationship. So we see these two teenagers falling in love and getting married. And we also see in history that they had 10 children, and then their 10 children had multitudes of children, some 11 and 12 children, and that their children had more. They had so many descendants. Even now, I'm descended for John and Priscilla on the Mayflower, and so are you. Because it all started with this love story. There's one part that I really love. And I better stop here. I'll give you a little bit, but I don't have much time.